In the icy vastness of Skyrim, there is an old tale, a song sung by all from the rift to the pale. So sit by the fire and hear the story without pause, as this is how Skyrim was saved by Santa Claus. Twas but a normal afternoon when our story began, as a bunch of prisoners arrived in Helgen. One of these carts was our old Santa the Nor, brought here against his own accord. To the block our hero was brought. His head was what the headsman sought, but from the skies a terror descended upon the keep. The fiend Alduin was ready for all the souls to reap. Santa sprinted through the blazing streets with all his might, while the winged dragon began to take flight. Eventually the old man heard two warriors in worry, and he took the first door he could in a hurry. Safe from the dragon, Roloff cut Santa from his binds. The sharpness of the blade the saint paid no mind. The moment of peace was cut short, as through the door came the captain and her cohort. Santa is very much a magic man. However, there is limits in what elements he can. Boundless are his prowess and alteration in the rest, but for destruction, ice is the only rules to this test. Roloff was more than a match for the foe, and through the keep the duo were all but slow. Santa was bound for now to his limited pacifism. Roloff more than made up for it with much masochism. After a while the duo's adventure came and went. They left the ruined cave ready for the next event. With a few weeks until Christmas, Santa had time to prepare. Before long he would have to fight against those who dare. Pointing a sign to the mages above as he should, he sprinted right past the town of Riverwood. Needing the septums for his attire, to Markarth did the old saint retire. Through the world, the helper stash hidden dead drops. Santa would use them for the evening props. He plundered his secret stash early to the helper's dismay, but with the gold would be used to repair Santa's sleigh. With 2,000 septums for clothes and a reindeer, Saturnalia has bestowed this bounty for rent for the rest of the year. And while sure the attire was far from the normal red, it was better than freezing up dead. With the impending dragons going to ruin the holiday fun, Santa ran to the hold of Whiterun. To prepare for the upcoming battles with the vile foes, he used his extra magic touch to enchant his clothes. With the Tome of Frost to give the bandits sorrow, old St. Nick departed to Bleakfell's Barrow. But before the battle with the frost-resistant undead, Santa departed to Hobbs Fall instead. In the middle of the iceberg was a fancy spell, and the battle the skeletons were sent back to hell. With the necromancers stripped by their vice, Santa gained the ability to summon leveling ice. Normally, leveling destruction can be hard. All is circumvented by using a credit card. While in the icy seas, valuing avoiding backtracking the most, Santa swam across the waters to Septimus outpost. From one crazy man to another they conversed, with the keys to an Elder Scroll Santa did purse. With the use of Unbounding Freeze while fast traveling through, Santa power leveled destruction to level 82. Within the barrow, bandits were already pilfering the tomb, so with blasts of ice punctured deep into their wounds. The giant spider of doom descended from the ceiling, but blasts of snow stripped it of any feeling. Santa tried to free Arvel the Swift, but the Draugr sliced him right into the rift. With the power of ice, Santa froze him back to bed, and the Overlord at the end becoming re-dead. After the pilfering was complete, Santa returned to Whiterun, unaware that travels were about to be more fun. Santa conversed with Farengar again, along with Balgruuf, for a guard came running with all hoof. Myrmilnir descended upon the watchtower, so Santa met the dragon at his full power. With spikes of ice, Santa thrusted at the dragon, and Myrmilnir crashed right into a wagon. Blast after blast, ice was rammed into its snoot, until it lay dead at last, no more flames to shoot. With the acts of heroism, Santa turned in the quest, for the Greybeards had a call from not the southwest. And thus Santa answered the call and traveled to Ivarstead, bringing the presents of food up in their stead. With reindeer in tow, Santa began to climb, riding up vertical walls in Sedoa's past her prime. When delivering one session with a voice, Santa began the trip to Usingrov against his choice. When Santa arrived in Morthal, he met a mob, angry of his child's life that was robbed. To appease the spirit, Santa took the case, and found a vampire seeking to erase. With the power of frost, Laylette was froze, and Thornir really needs better taste than hose. The peasants rallied, vengeance for their homestead, all they want was Morvarth said. With Santa tagging along, the mob descended. The vampire's lair will be purified before the night ended. The battle was rough, Morvarth resisted ice, but Thornir was done playing nice. Santa distracted Morvarth for long enough, with Thornir's axe hit very strong. Before the last blow, Morvarth retreated deeper inside, unaware that Alva would cut him wide. With the evil plaguing Morthal was slain by the best, Helgi could finally be laid to rest. Before Santa plundered the tomb, he arrived in Solitude, where the people were met with such attitude. Rogvir was decapitated in front of poor Zavari and her mother, who was too grieving to say sorry. Into the Hall of the Dead, the old saint got the Amulet of Talos, a memory for Greta, whom fell at the gallows. Zavari was thankful for Santa for saving the old rag and invited him to play tag. With another child's sorrows been helped, the next stop was to find a horn that was scalped. Through the tomb, old Santa snuck around, and the necromancer's skull's icicles were found. Speed was the name of the game, and he descended down rocks for a skip not dependent on frame. He grabbed the ethereal shout before finding he was too slow for the stout. Santa returned to Riverwood to meet with the innkeep, who thought that the festive man was but a creep. But with the dangers of dragons, the safety of cities dove, and together they departed to Kinesgrove. When they arrived at the den, they were encompassed in fear, as Alduin has already awakened Salconir. But with blasts of ice and potions of magic, the death of the dragon was all but tragic. With Christmas Day fast approaching, Santa didn't know what would be in store. The only option was to interrogate the Thalmor. The next mission was one to sneak, something Santa is a master of. But rather than that, there is one thing Santa does more love: to punish the naughty elves who caused the era much strife, so Santa made sure to snuff them of all their life. With spikes of ice and armor to shell himself, he was able to purify every last elf, making sure along the way to save the prisoner in Malborn. Thankfully the shackles were pretty worn. As for the frost troll at the end, a rune of paralysis was more than enough to defend. Before Santa can rescue Esbern from the Ratways, Santa would instead head to a den to level alteration for days. The visit was a quick in and out, a few minutes was all it took. All this so Santa can learn telekinesis from a book. In Riften, Santa made a stop to assassinate Grelog the Kind, a bonk from a pan, but the kids paid no mind. Free from their abuse, they stood atop her body and started to dance, and the orphanage would be taken over by the much nicer Constance. With the evildoer taken a deadly shove, he entered the Ratways that smelt like a sweaty glove. Santa used his power to paralyze those who would try to stop him, a sneaky trip to make sure no one catches him across Skyrim. Stop the body they would soon forget. As for the evildoers, a trap they would soon regret. And thinking ahead, he laid another trap where the Thalmor will appear. And once Esbern was rescued, their spawning would turn them to fear. A quick icicle to freeze them where they stood, the duo would then return to Riverwood. And when they arrived to the basement that stunk, they found Embry, who stumbled into the secret already drunk. As Esbern and Delphine departed to the temple at Sky Haven, Santa was distracted at Markarth's market thanks to Waylon. Santa saved Margaret from the attack, a deed well done, but Santa was here for something to make the week run. He climbed to the temple of Dobella, a place a little lewd, but the sisters wanted to kill Santa for being a dude. The group struck a bargain, knowing the man was supposed to be civil, and they asked the saint to rescue the young captured Sybil. While on the journey to Karswagen, Santa's brain started to retire, and instead of the township, he accidentally entered Karspire. He plundered the Forsworn and solved simple puzzles, and Santa donated blood so the seal could guzzle. He learned of his fate, and the world was soon to be doomed. On Christmas Day, all of Tamriel would be consumed. But a few days away, Santa knew that he could not stay, helping out the remaining children so they could be happy for one final day. With the clock ticking, he would have to first rescue the Sybil, to save the girl from her little drivel. Edmond, the Sybil's father, would help Santa in this endeavor, but his soul would be consumed forever. In one final act of heroism, he shoved Santa aside, for him to be crushed by a landslide. Santa climbed to the top, but he had to play it smart, as the girl was being protected by a brighter heart. Both blasted magic at each other with all their might, but only Santa would come out alive from this fight. With the Sybil rescued, returned to Markarth, the temple was saved, and Santa was happy his next insurance wasn't waived. There is much to do before Christmas Eve night, so he wants to be all prepared for a legendary fight. First he went to Windhelm to tell Aventus the good news, and when traveling to Rorikstead was a fight Santa could lose. The frost dragon descended down towards the giant's camp, and it took them all out like a lamp. After a lot of frost magic and mammoths, the dragon falls, but even more menaces would soon descend upon towns without walls. At Rorikstead, Santa got a mysterious letter, and he had to fight a skeleton whose AI has seen better. The reason Santa traveled to the small stead was to punish the father who's a little sick in the head, but a fugitive first wanted to pawn off an axe, but Santa pointed the hunter to the man, no questions asked. Santa punished the abrasive, rude sap, and then he got abducted while taking a nap. Astrid sat on the shelf, smug with her deed, but unbound were Santa's hand, and something Astrid did not heed. With a well-placed bolt of ice, Astrid fell over dead, and Santa evacuated everyone from the shed. With the hostages safely rescued, Santa talked to Commander Morrow, who wants the sanctuary purified by tomorrow. In the town of Falkreath, the citizens feared for the limits of their safety. As a werewolf escaped the jail, he finds young ones tasty. With the sanctuary of the Brotherhood nearby in the lands, Santa walked into the fort to empty their hands. With a hearty ho ho ho, Santa blew forth a mighty blizzard, killed all from Yarborn to that forgettable lizard. With the Brotherhood banished from Skyrim, the people can sleep without fearing a fate most grim. To get a hint as to where the werewolf went, Santa found a deer, who sat there with a troll that drank one too many beer. Along the way to the cave, Santa found a camp full of saint, and he decorated the walls with a fresh red paint. In the grotto, Santa did not waste any time. Sinding would pay for his killer crime. The wolf's effort to kill hunters ended up in moot, and Santa fashioned Sinding's fur into fresh new boots. With the girl avenged, only a few more quests had to be done, and the clock of doom slowly ticking towards 1. And when home, Santa found a grisly scene, a murder most foul, and the stones far from clean. But Santa knows all, and the culprit he did know. He found the amulet and stopped one bloodthirsty Calixto. Santa's memory almost forgot about Balgor's child, the one who heard whispers gone wild. With a pleat and a pick, the evil blade was found, but Santa knew another warrior whose evil was unbound. So Santa traveled to the furthest reaches of the north and thrusted the sword into the icy water henceforth. And the last quest before the fight started with a thief soon in flight. With thieves and letters surely abound, all to find a sword with a peculiar sound. Santa traveled to and fro, with more card-related letters, to free a family cursed by unwanted betters. He found out the sword was stored in Silverdrift Lair. Outside the crypt were a few bandits who'd even say a prayer. Inside the tomb, traps and Draugr were abound, obvious that the treasure was not wanting to be found. With Santa's hand he wielded his trusty mace, as he clobbered in that Draugr's face. Deep inside a randomly placed chest was the blade, and into the night, Bjorfur and his reunited son would fade. With the children of Skyrim safer with a rested soul, Santa departed to Afghan in search of an Elder Scroll. Only 2 days left until Christmas Eve, so a trip to Afghan would have to be a quick grab and leave. Using his ethereal form, he rushed through the dungeon, avoiding the robots and one angry curmudgeon. In the deepest reaches of the world was Blackreach, extremely rare a soul would ever breach. A quick jog to the tower with all the loot, all while avoiding every last moot. With the powers of going right to left, Santa grabbed the scroll and shoved it in some unknown cleft. The night of fate was almost nigh, and Santa shared what he feared, and the graybeards parted with gifts, and the clouds were cleared. Santa climbed to the top of the skies, which was the domain where the dragon cries. The old saint took out the scroll of Christmas past, and warriors of old taught Santa the sacred blast. Out of the dream, a shadowy figure emerged. Alduin, the demon the warriors attempted to purge. With the sacred power in hand, Santa let out blasts that shook the land. The battle was fierce, a battle of ice and fire. It came down to almost the wire. But with one last icicle in the head, Alduin would retreat to the land of the dead. The day was saved, so Santa thought, because tomorrow would be the delivery day he sought. The one wish that comes up time and time again was for peace to be restored and signed by pen. Santa begged and pleaded with the Jarls to be honored the legacy mentioned by some Charles. The leaders talked with one another on terms and conditions and respect everyone's current positions. With a few holds traded and the fighting stopped, onto the delivery train Santa hopped. With peace restored across Tamriel, so Santa thought, he began to visit all the good boys and girls with the goods he brought. 2 magical rings and a sweet roll for a little battleborn, and Birth gets a garnet and pretty clothes slightly worn. The gray means get an axe and a gem with much gleam, and a lump of coal for naughty Nazim. Saventus gets some robes to continue the brotherhood, and Cold Sophie got many precious gems as she should. As Santa continued his midnight deliveries, he turned to the skies. Echelons of dragons continued to rise. Santa had been deceived, the threads of fate was not stopped. He had a few hours until the world had dropped. A dragon descended from the skies, ready for its next sin. Santa froze the lizard to the bone, his last words were Skuldolphin. The old saint knew what was there, a fortress of despair, and its architecture was in much disrepair. He rushed to Dragon's Reach, called forth his trusty dragon-shaped deer, and flew to the Endbringer's domain, quivering in fear. When Santa got off the dragon, the moon was high, a few hours before prophecy's end would be nigh. Draugrs and dragon descended on the saint, to top the old man. He rushed past them, turning invisible every chance he can. Whites and restless, the scourge to stop him, all while solving puzzles and humming a festive hymn. A Draugr lord guarding the door yelled with all his might, "It's too late! Alduin's return is all but nigh. Now perish from this fight. Blasts of ice strewn from Santa's hand, impaling the Draugr in the heart. Key in hand, he rushed outside to places with no chart. The worms and the undead continued to rush on the poor saint. As for the priest, Santa froze it in place to prevent its faint. Into the portal Santa rushed in, to a fight he could not win. When Santa came to, he found himself in Sovngarde, a magical place only sung about from the bard. He wandered through the endless mist, a soul snare from Alduin while hiding amongst the mist. Through the valley did Santa wander, until he came across a mighty hall over yonder. Guarding the bridge was a mighty warrior with a powerful axe. Soon was his name, taking his power to the max. By what right doth thou have in the Hall of Valor? Said the warrior through the skies of Keller. I am Santa Claus, and I am here to stop the worm, and I shall pass, and my will stands firm. Soon only let the old man pass, we put him to the test. Against he warrior only called the very best. Santa ducked and weaved to the best he could. One swing from Soon is enough to split the hardest of wood. But the blast of ice was enough to prove the Santa's worth, and he rushed into the hall to save the earth. In the hall, 3 familiar spirits stood ready amassed. Santa knew them as the ghosts of Christmas past. They were ready for revenge on Alduin, the vile beast, and they all went outside abandoning their divine feast. They yelled at the mist to bring out the dragon, but it answered back, returning the souls to be gone. The voices yelled back and forth until Alduin had enough, and began the final fight that is more than rough. Alduin rained down meters of brimstone, the hottest of fires, while the group blasted it with volleys of ice, it all coming down from the wires. When Santa thought he delivered the final blow, Alduin had one last trick. He blindsided old Santa, and he fell with a grievous wound forever to stick. Through the lands, the people of Skyrim heard Santa's pleas, the Argonians, the Nords, and the wildlife, and even the fleas. Everyone who Santa helped stood together in prayer that Santa could return from his final despair. The hopes of everyone filled into Santa, standing on his feet. Alduin was aghast, but the old man returned from his defeat. Worry still fight, your end is all but nigh. Santa returned back to the worm, because I'm the hope of the people, and that is why. Channeling the hopes of the people, an ultimate blizzard whose ferocity could make the giants cower. Alduin blasted, mawed, everything he could at the saint, but the powers of ice kept coming, nothing could make the Santa faint. But Alduin's efforts were in vain to stop the blizzard, and death came for the vile lizard. Alduin yelled to the heavens, the end of his destined fate. As Christmas morning ascended, Santa was not late. The worm disintegrated, and the day was saved. Santa returned to the living, smiling at the warriors and waved. And that was how Christmas was saved for Skyrim, and the end of this tale told on a whim. Santa continued to make deliveries through the day, a little late, on his steed flying, not bothered by the wait. He flew through the skies wishing all a good night, as Santa ascended into the light.